He was a camel driver, a man who hauled salt from the marshes of Egypt and sold it for a few coins. His name was Macarius. He was not educated, not wealthy, not holy by any measure the world would recognize. But one afternoon, he walked into the desert and never came back. When he finally died, a demon came to his cell, not to torment him, to mourn. "In one thing only do you beat me," the demon said, "your humility. Because of that, I can do nothing against you." That line has traveled 17 centuries to reach you tonight. This is a summary of the sayings of the Desert Fathers, compiled from the 4th and 5th centuries and translated by Benedicta Ward. This is the book that shaped Christian monasticism, influenced Benedict of Nursia, and has quietly outlasted every self-help tradition it predates by 1,000 years. If you want a summary like this every week, subscribing takes one tap. Here is what this book is: a collection of short, blunt sayings from monks who went out into the Egyptian desert between roughly 270 and 450 AD and stayed there. Not pretty sayings, not systematic theology. Practical wisdom from people who spent their entire lives working on one problem: how to be a human being without destroying yourself or others. They called these sayings the apophthegmata patrum, the words of the fathers, arranged alphabetically by the name of the father who said them: Anthony, Arsenius, Macarius, Moses, Poemen the shepherd, who appears more often than almost anyone in the book. Together, these names form something close to an instruction manual for an inner life. Here is the question planted at the heart of this book: what does a person do when they have removed every distraction, every excuse, every escape, and still find that they are not at peace? That question is never fully resolved, but the way the fathers lived inside it changes you. The first thing to understand is why they went. Anthony the Great was about 20 years old, the son of a wealthy Egyptian family, sitting in church, when he heard a gospel verse: "Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and come, follow me." He applied it to himself. He walked out of the church, gave away everything, and went into the desert. That was around the year 270. By the time he died at 105, he had become the figure around whom an entire civilization of interior life had gathered. Thousands followed, not out of neurosis, not out of failure, but out of a specific conviction that the inner life is the real life, and that it requires the same seriousness a farmer gives to his soil. The desert was not a metaphor. It was the Nile Delta, Nitria, Cetis, real places, stone huts with branch roofs, a reed mat for a bed, a lamp. They wove ropes from palm leaves and sold them for bread. They did not sleep more than they had to. They fasted, prayed, and sat in silence for days. And they were not running away from something. They were running toward it. One of the most repeated phrases in the entire collection is, "Speak a word, Father." People would travel weeks across desert terrain to sit with an old man and ask that single question. Not for theology, for a word, one sentence sometimes, that they could take back and live inside for years. A monk came to Basil of Caesarea and said, "Speak a word, Father." Basil said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart." The monk went away. 20 years later he returned. "Father, I have struggled to keep your word. Now speak another." Basil said, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." The monk returned to his cell to keep that also. 20 years for one sentence. That is how seriously these people took a word. The second thing to understand is what they were actually fighting. It was not the world, it was themselves. The Desert Fathers had a precise vocabulary for the forces that tear a person apart from the inside. They called them demons. but the descriptions are startlingly modern. Aksidi, the heavy, restless emptiness that makes a person unable to stay with anything. Vainglory, doing the right things for the wrong audience. Anger, pride. These were not sins to be confessed once and done. They were patterns of the psyche that required constant attention. Anthony himself was beset by Aksidi, the sense that the work was pointless, the day endless, his efforts meaningless. He asked God for help and looked up to see a figure sitting at work, getting up to pray, sitting back down, getting up again. Work, pray, work, pray. Do this, the figure said, and you will be saved. That was the whole answer, not a vision, not rapture, a rhythm. This is the genius of the desert approach. They were not trying to achieve a permanent state of holiness. They were trying to build a rhythm sturdy enough to hold them when nothing felt holy at all. Evagrius Ponticus, a scholar from Constantinople who eventually came to Scetis and stayed, mapped 8 chief passions that disturb the soul. Later thinkers compressed these into the 7 deadly sins. But Evagrius had something more specific in mind. These were recurring internal states that seize your attention and drag it away from what matters. The antidote was not willpower. It was discernment, the ability to see what is actually happening inside you without immediately becoming it. Keep your attention on yourself, Anthony said. Not on other people's sins, not on doctrine, on yourself. That is the whole program. The third thing, and this is where it gets strange and beautiful, is the role of the other person. You might expect desert monasticism to produce radical individualism, hermits who despise the world, men who have given up on humanity. The opposite is true. My life is with my brother, Anthony said. He left his desert cell twice, once during a persecution of Christians in Alexandria, and once to defend his bishop against heresy. The solitude was not the end. It was the training ground for a radical availability. Macarius of Egypt once came back to his cell and found a thief loading his belongings onto a camel. Macarius walked over and helped him load the rest. When the camel refused to move until it was unloaded, Macarius retrieved one small item he had missed, added it to the pile, and said quietly, "Get up." The camel rose. Macarius stood there watching his possessions disappear, at peace. Moses, a man who had been a slave, then a robber in Egypt before becoming a monk, was summoned to a council where a brother was to be judged for some fault. Moses arrived carrying a leaking jug of water that dribbled down his back as he walked. "My sins run out behind me, and I do not see them," he said. "And today, I am coming to judge the errors of another." The council dismissed. The brother was forgiven. The refusal to judge is not passive indifference in these pages. It is one of the most demanding practices they describe. You cannot judge another person while your own jug is leaking. Now here's the paradox at the center of this book. These are people who left society to be alone. But over and over, the sayings return to the neighbor, the brother, the stranger at the door. When Abba Joseph held up his hands in prayer and his fingers blazed like torches, the image is not of someone transcending humanity. It is of someone who has stopped dividing themselves, where the inner life and the outer life have become one continuous movement towards something larger than either. A brother once asked an old man what the work of the soul was. The old man said, "Everything you do as a commandment of God." Not the weaving, not the fasting, the commandment. Love God, love your neighbor. That is the work. The rope making is subordinate. Abba Poemen, called the shepherd the most quoted father in the entire collection, put it plainly: teach your mouth to say what your heart wishes. One line. The whole gap between inner life and outer life collapsed into a single instruction. And yet the rope making matters. The body matters. The rhythm matters. Abba Lucius, confronted by monks who claimed to pray without ceasing and did no manual work, asked them, "When you are eating, who prays for you? When you are sleeping, who prays for you?" Then he sat down, soaked his reeds, plaited his rope, and said quietly throughout the entire day, "God, have mercy on me. According to your great goodness, save me from my sins." At the end of the day, he gave 2 coins to someone who would pray for him while he ate. "And so," he said, "by the grace of God, I fulfill the precept to pray without ceasing." Prayer, for these people, was not a scheduled activity. It was what the whole life became when the whole life was pointed the right way. Now the answer, or something close to an answer, to the question buried in the opening. An old man asked a young monk to go to the cemetery and abuse the dead. The monk went, insulted the graves, threw stones, came back. "Did they answer?" the old man asked. "No. Go back and praise them." The monk went, praised them as apostles and saints, returned. "Did they answer?" "No." The old man said, "So you too must do the same. Take no account of the scorn of men or their praises. Then you can be saved." Not stone-faced detachment, freedom. The freedom of someone who no longer needs the world's verdict on their worth. This is the answer to the question planted at the beginning. What does a person do when they have removed every distraction and still find no peace? They keep going. They stop expecting peace to feel pleasant. They sit in the cell, literal or otherwise, long enough to find that the restlessness was never the problem. The restlessness was the engine. The cell teaches you everything, they said, not because it is where you escape the world, but because it is where you can no longer escape yourself. Arsenius, the Roman aristocrat who tutored the emperor's sons, who wore the finest clothes in the empire, who one night heard a voice say, "Arsenius, flee from men and you will be saved," and was never quite the same again, spent his last years in a cell 32 miles from anyone. He prayed on Saturday evenings with his hands stretched toward the setting sun, and he stayed there until Sunday morning when the light came back and found his face. He fled men because he loved them too much to do it poorly. That is the strange mathematics of this book. The further in you go, the more everyone else comes with you. Tonight, wherever you are lying down, there is probably some version of this question alive in you. Whether the life you are living is the life you actually want. Whether the noise around you is drowning out something quieter that has been trying to get your attention for a long time. The Desert Fathers would not have had a program for you. They would have handed you a rope to plait and sat down in silence beside you. And eventually they would have said, "Go back to your cell. Whatever you are looking for, it will not be found somewhere else. It is here, in the place you keep trying to leave." If something in this video stayed with you, drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know which saying landed, and a like helps more people find this channel than you might think.